Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today with me is co-host Chris Rossini. He's also the editor of the libertyreport.com. Chris, nice to have you with us today.
Hi, Dr. Paul. Good morning.
Good. I want to talk a little bit about an article both you and I have read this morning, and it's on Politico, and it brings up something, believe it or not, it has something to do with the campaign. You know, it's pretty hard to see anything other than that. But what I find disgusting about the campaign, most of it is frivolous and it's goofy. But I hope what we're going to talk about is a little bit more of substance. And that has to do with this interesting article that Politico wrote. It says, Trump and Sanders, common cause, that they're working together, that they're getting along together, philosophically speaking. And it points out that they care about the working man, the blue-collar man, and the middle class and the poor. And they come across with a system called populism, that you design everything to help the poor people and the middle class, which I think everybody wants to do, but sometimes they get off on tangents. But they're proposing, you know, working together, and obviously they take these positions on trade and trade agreements and tariffs. And I know you've taken a look at this, Chris. What is it that strikes you about this? That could we possibly, as libertarians, agree with anything these guys say?
Fascinatingly enough, yeah, we can agree on at least one part of what they're talking about. They both are interested in gutting free trade agreements, and we read about those all the time, how free trade is killing the American worker. Unfortunately, their solutions are not nearly what we would propose, because to begin with, these agreements, NAFTA, TPP, and the others, they're not free trade at all. They're about as free trade as the Patriot Act has to do with patriotism. They're government-managed trade, and they run thousands of pages long. There's cronyism involved. There's subsidies. There's red tape, bureaucracy. Has nothing to do with free trade. But they're called free trade agreements, ironically enough. And it actually works in the government's favor, because when these quote-unquote free trade agreements fall apart, they could get the masses against free trade, even though it has nothing to do with free trade. Real legitimate free trade does not take 1,000 pages. You can do it in one paragraph or one line. It says, we're abolishing all tariffs and all licensing and bureaucracy, and people can trade with one another between countries.
Right.
That's real free trade, and that's not what these agreements are. And they also are proposing, and this is where we strongly disagree with them, the tariffs, Dr. Paul. And please talk about why raising tariffs would not help anyone.
Well, this is sort of the theme we picked up in our title. Why do these two guys want to tax the poor? Tariffs are taxes, and they hurt the poor the most. The poor learn to shop quite well, and if they get something made in a foreign country where labor prices are different than here, where they're artificially high, the poor people benefit the most. And this is what they're attacking: 35%, 45% tariffs on imports, whether it's from Mexico or whether it's from China. Or wherever. This is a tremendous burden on the poor and the average person. It's also very detrimental to the whole notion of jobs, too, because in trade wars, whether they're currency wars or whether they're tariff wars, this ruins trade. And right now, more than ever in the whole history of the world, there's been a greater dependency on globalism. The real problem with the type of globalism we have today is we don't have a single currency that is part of the marketplace that they agree on, and they have all this currency competition. So what they're doing is they want to raise taxes on the very people they claim that they're helping. And they don't recognize the fact that some of these jobs probably shouldn't even come back. And I think of them as Luddites. And those were the individuals back in the early part of the 19th century that was so opposed to automation. And they wanted to maintain these low-paying jobs, not realizing that new items come in and they create new jobs. It's sort of like protecting the blacksmiths, because you don't want to put all the blacksmiths out of business, and we can't let them just buy an automobile. This will hurt so many people, not realizing that you get many, many more jobs in the auto industry than you did when you had blacksmiths shoeing horses. So they don't understand this, so they're very detrimental to jobs as well. But I'm sure there are some other things in there that you notice that you might be able to challenge the conventional wisdom of the populists now running for president.
Yes, you make some great points, especially on tariffs. I mean, the one thing that Americans should realize is that a tariff is a tax on you. When Trump says he's going to beat China and beat Japan, he means that he's going to tax you, because China and Japan don't pay the tariff, the consumer does. So if you want your taxes to go up, then support the tariffs. But I don't think many Americans want that. Donald Trump also, the way his distorted view of trade, he mentions how he's going to, if he's president, have American companies that do business overseas, they're going to have to bring their jobs back here and bring their manufacturing back here. But Dr. Paul, it's not so simple. I'm sure that you've read I, Pencil by Leonard Read, who I know that you used to know, that what goes into manufacturing is there are so many variables. So if you could talk about why this authoritarian attitude of they're going to bring their jobs back here when I'm president, please explain why that would never work.
Well, they play on this authoritarianism, whether it comes from the far left or from a Trumpism approach. Believing that there's chaos out there in the labor markets. People aren't well trained, they're not making enough money, cost of living is higher than their wages are going up. That's all true because of monetary policy and inflation and over-regulation. So what they're arguing is that if they had more authority to use more force, and I see it exactly opposite as I think most libertarians would. We need less force. What we need is the invisible hand that even Adam Smith knew about a long time ago, how things work out. So the more complicated it is, the less government force that you want to use. But these two guys want to use government force these companies back, tax them if they don't do it. I'll be tough on them. And yet what we need is labor to be freer, and the pricing of labor has to be freer. Does that mean labor prices will go down automatically and people will be working for nothing? No, in our industrial revolution, it was the car companies that first gave the greatest wage increases ever known because of the free market. But we have too much central economic planning, because there are still right now a lot of jobs going begging, which Trump nor Sanders ever mentions, going begging, but they need training. They need to know how to do something. But we're so bent on sending everybody to get a college degree, and they come out and they have debt and they're not trained to do anything, and they're not even in reality about what kind of jobs that they need. They need to be technology jobs. They need to know how to do something. And but the school system redirects them in the wrong way, and I think that has been going on. So I think the monopoly control over the educational system has been detrimental. Believe me, if we had none of the government trying to direct education, business people, and they still do a lot of this, they have apprenticeships and all, but right now there are a lot of jobs going begging. But then there is also, the problem of how much does it cost them to go to work if they're receiving some welfare benefits. Of course, we're not allowed to say that because that's politically incorrect. But why would we have so many people in the labor, so many people out of the labor force? There a huge amount, 37% of them are out of it, because why would they come back in if the increase from what they're getting for not working wouldn't be so much? So the system that government has gotten in the way, they have wrecked the pricing of labor. And unfortunately, because of this mess that they've created, working people can't keep up with the cost of living. So yes, we have to be aware of that, but mandating, I'm sure you have an opinion about mandating a $15 an hour wage, and California's doing that. I guess Texas better watch out. We're going to get more of those immigrants from California coming to Texas.
Yeah. One thing I would like to cover is, when a company goes overseas, that's a major decision. It's not a minor detail. They have to deal with different languages, different laws, different cultures. Will their company be nationalized? Are their assets safe? But Americans, when they think of a company going overseas, they think two words: cheap labor, and that's it. And they're like trained to think that that's the only variable involved. But in order for a company to go overseas, they have to really be pushed. And our government has pushed hard, whether it's with all the bureaucratic laws and red tape in hiring somebody. Are you hiring the right sex, the right age, the right gender? Will this person sue you if you fire them? Are you discriminating? There's so many variables. Oh, do you have to provide them with health care or access to contraceptives? It's insane what hiring has become in this country. And companies, they say, you know what? There's greener pastures. There's governments out there that don't mess with all this stuff, and the minimum wage is another one. So governments push companies out, and it's not just about cheap labor. Now, there has to be a way out of this, Dr. Paul, and we believe that we have the answers. So what can we do to at least push in the right direction? Because right now, things are not going in the right direction.
Well, I think this distortion that you talk about in labor costs and all in the regulation, in a way, it's sort of like a bubble. And everything that government does and the Federal Reserve does when they see a financial bubble is trying to prevent the necessary correction to get rid of all the mistakes made. Politically, that's not popular, even though that is the cleansing method. That's the treatment that is needed. So right now, it would be for the government to back off on some of this, get rid of these regulations, change the tax code, get the corporate tax down from 35%, and so much of this would be improved. But instead, what they want to do is prop up the old system. So if this system has created people who are still working for $8 an hour, and that's what the law says, well, the law must be wrong. So all we have to do is mandate a $15 an hour. So they're propping up an old system. They do not allow the correction. The correction is get out of the way. Let it work. Let the people be trained. Give them the incentive that maybe a job is necessary to feed yourself. And this would be so much difference. And people say, oh, that's cruel. That's the trouble with you libertarians. You're so cruel. But think of what we have now. If they think allowing people to be free and we become more prosperous with a free market and sound economic policy, look at what they have created after 75 years of this economic planning, and how one thing that I'm shocked about is I've talked about this for so many years, and I'm upset with it, and I thought a lot had to be done, and I knew that people were upset. But you know what? I never realized that how upset they have been. And that's what's going on in this campaign. People are really, really upset. And unfortunately, the fact that they have been so upset, they're not really getting the right answers and the hope that this will cure it, because they're coming up with old ideas. Tariffs? I mean, there's hardly even an economic school of its worth that says that tariffs should be on. Even some populists know that, and I would suspect that Donald Trump would know that. But, it plays well, and anything that gets attention and the media plays it up, that's fine and dandy. Sanders, he's a true believer in government intervention. I believe he's very sincere in wanting to help the poor. But, good intentions aren't worth very much. And I think these good intentions are being very harmful because they have a mistake. What really counts are correct ideas. And if you don't have the correct ideas, believe me, it's not going to work. So is there anything else that you can think of, Chris, that we should do to correct this system, that move in the right direction?
Well, the final thought that I would have is, we have to come to the realization that we live under the biggest government in the history of the world. And it has turned the economy into a Gordian knot, and it just gets tighter and tighter and tighter. Now, to think that we need another president to go in and tighten the screws even more, it's going to lead us to disaster. So we need to take this big, huge government and start peeling it like an onion, peeling it away, the red tape, the bureaucracy, and let people work and voluntarily interact with one another. And I think we'll be on the right path then.
Well, you know, it's hard for people to understand that just getting more freedom is the answer, but I actually believe this. And the biggest notion is that automation is an enemy, and that if robots come in, then all these jobs will be gone. But if you allow the market to sort these things out, it's not that bad. That doesn't mean everything will be smooth sailing, but it also means that the whole country doesn't collapse in a mess of runaway inflation and runaway regulations and trade wars, and then the fear of a hot war, because that generally is what is the case, and there's so many hot spots around the world today. So we live in a dangerous time, and it's interesting that two individuals from almost opposite poles politically are coming together and saying what we need are more taxes, more authoritarianism, and we need to reject the notion that free markets could possibly work in the labor market. But the history is there, the principles are there, and it's a clear-cut case that the freer the markets, the more wealthy the people are, the more prosperity there is. People don't have, they don't understand that, and they don't support it because they don't really know how it works. And this is a reflection of the lousy education that most people have gotten in this country for the many, many decades that they teach that Austrian economics, they never heard of it. The Federal Reserve is an absolute necessity. Gold is ridiculous. And that unregulated by the government in the economy, there'd be no regulations. And yet, at the same time, regulations are more onerous when you're dealing with property rights and contract rights. So, Chris, that is what I see as the solution. And once again, Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today.
My pleasure, Dr. Paul. Thank you.
And I'd like to invite all our viewers to come back soon to the Liberty Report. And thanks for being with us today.